Good afternoon. My name is Erin with Automation Services. Thank you for joining us for practical uses of IDEA. Our presenter today is Carl Seyfarth. Carl has over 20 years experience providing services to local government and nonprofit organizations. Data analytics plays a major part in his audit process, and he has been using IDEA for about 7 years. This webcast is worth 1 hour of NASBA CPE. In order to receive CPE credit, you must be logged in for the entire hour, answer 3 of the 4 polling questions, and complete the brief evaluation at the end of the webcast. We are recording the session. The slides and recording should be sent out tomorrow. Qualifying attendees will receive their CPE certificates within a week. If you have any questions, please type them in the questions box on the right side of your screen. We will answer them at the end of the webcast if time allows. At this time, I'm going to turn over control to Carl, and we can get started.
Good afternoon, everybody. I'm here to talk to you about some practical uses for IDEA. And these are all things that I use pretty much on every audit that we do, if they pertain. Some will be more for government and some will be more for the nonprofits. But they're all doable for most anybody. So what we're going to be learning about today is where IDEA can save us some effort and increase audit effectiveness. Quick look at the IDEA ribbon, which is their toolbar. A little bit about obtaining data, and then using the dashboards as part of our audit process, and then turning those analysis into work papers and talking with clients about them. So here's some reasons that I found why we should use IDEA. It does save us time, and mostly in the sampling and some of in the sampling areas, but it also gives us better audit coverage and effectiveness. We can do a lot more with a data analytic tool than we could ever do manually, and we can get a good quick look at what our transaction is going on at a real quick glance. It kind of pulls it all out, so you're not shuffling through. If you're using a QuickBooks file, glancing down through tons and tons of transactions, it kind of helps highlight things very quickly and easily. Here's some common types of transactions that we can readily analyze with IDEA. Payments, receipts, invoices, both accounts payable and sales invoices, pretty much whatever you can get your hands on from either your client or generate yourself if they give you their files. Some really exciting ones that I enjoy doing and have found very helpful in our audits is looking at user activity reports, and we'll see more on that later. Really the only limitation to what you can use IDEA to analyze and improve your effectiveness with is your imagination and knowledge of your client, coupled with what data you can get out. But if you're thinking about things, you can get a lot of information and adapt various other tests. One of the things that I've taken a lot of CPE courses in over the past few years has been fraud and data analytics. Not so much that I'm doing fraud investigations, but I can adapt a lot of the ideas from those courses or books into my regular testing. So you'll see some of those as we go along in the presentation. These are the 2 basic ribbons that I use most in IDEA. The top one is the standard ribbon, which has a lot of the detailed, the tests that you can use, and you can go right to that when you want to perform the test on your data. And then the bottom ribbon right underneath that is I call it standard audit scripts, and those are basically mini programs that I either wrote myself or downloaded from either Caseware or Automation, and I use them a lot, like the fill down blank spaces if you've got spaces in your data file that needs to be filled up. Some of the other ones, which say QB in front of them, those are ones I developed myself, the things that I do repeating over and over and over again. In order to use particularly the scripts that you write for yourself, you want to really standardize how you do things, standardize how you import your data, what fields you have, so that'll ensure that you can always be using things quickly and properly. A fairly new innovation in IDEA are the dashboards. And I'm going to jump ahead one slide because that's got a picture of a dashboard on it. And this is my typical payments dashboard. It gives you a really, at a glance, a really good idea of what's going on in that data file. At the top has some key statistics on it, like the number of checks that were in the file, the total amounts for the dollar value of the checks written, the biggest one, the average value, and then to show that I've got a complete set of how complete my data set is, or that I'm getting it from the right dates, I've got the two dates, the beginning and the ending date. And this particular client is a June year end, and I was in doing interim field work in early May. That's why the end of the period is May 2nd. And they do their first check run 2 weeks into July. So the other interesting thing that gives you a good idea what's going on at a glance is on the lower left, where you can see the payments by to the vendors, and that can be done either by count or average, or this one is done by the total value of payments to those vendors. And that kind of, you might spot something out of whack. Like in this one, when I looked at it, I hadn't really talked to them yet, and I could see, oh, they must be going on a capital project because they've got architect fees. So things like that can sometimes jump out at you. And these other little bars of stratifications, you can click and see what kind of checks are in those ranges. I frequently use that if I want to do a stratified sample to say, okay, how much is in each area, and what things really count, matter to me or don't matter. On the right-hand side, I've got it set by fiscal month so that I can see the different patterns, and I can compare the count of checks versus their dollar value, and many times there's a correlation. Sometimes there's something odd that throws it off. I can click into any of those bars and see what those payments are each month and say, okay, is there a really big one or not, or what's throwing this off. And you can actually, you're not stuck with this particular dashboard. You may decide you want some different information on your dashboard. They're very customizable. And there also can be reused, so you can use the same one from year to year, or you can say, well, this is my standard dashboard and I'm going to use it for most of my clients. Talked about that. Here's another dashboard. It's very similar to the other one. This is for receipts, and it's for, I think, a school. And it kind of shows where the main payments are coming from. So you get you should have an idea of that. The interesting thing on this is down on the lower right. That is a comparison of 3 different databases. I had to put them all together into one, but we had a conversation with management about cash flow and some of their payments coming in late. So I wanted to kind of put together a comparison and say, okay, can I draw a relationship between when the receipts come in and how they make their payments out? I may not have been too successful here, but it was my first stab at coming up with it. And it just kind of, I put it in here just to show you guys where you can do and how much information you can get out, and you can kind of come up with your own ideas on how to do that customization. Okay. Here's some of the tests that I normally do when I'm doing our audits. And I use IDEA to do this. I can look at, see which vendors they have. I can go through the whole payments file and summarize it by vendor and say, okay, these are the largest ones, and I can see how many checks are written to each one, so I can see the number of transactions, and I can get a an idea of what, look for unusual ones with that. I can do a review for large and unusual transactions. A lot of times I'll do that by doing another stratification, and I'll say, okay, these are all the large ones, or this is my cutoff for large. I can click into it and look at it and say, okay, yep, these, they're pretty normal, and these are, this one I want to kind of look into a little bit further. The nice thing here is you don't have to go scanning through volumes and volumes and volumes of pages of transactions. They're kind of summarized in a good orderly manner. You click on it, say, yep, those are. So you can kind of get an idea quickly and easily of what you're looking at. Same with doing samples. You can use IDEA right out of the to do your samples, document your sample sizes, set your risk factors, and there's a picture of that a little bit later on. A lot of times I'll get a list of related parties like board members, members of management, and I can set that up as a another file and compare the two using IDEA, so I can find any payments that were made to board members, or if I know their businesses, made to their businesses, so I can eliminate that out. I search it for payments to attorneys. A lot of times they say, well, give us the files for all the payments to attorneys, but if they put them into a different account code, maybe we won't get that. So if I do this, if I figure out the names of the attorneys, I can do a search and extract all of the payments, and then I can make sure when I'm looking at the bills that I've got them all. A couple of years ago, we put together a little script for doing the search for unrecorded liabilities, and it can select all of the payments that are made in various subsequent months that are over certain dollar ranges, and I've got a picture of that coming up as well. Here it is. So pretty much for this, I enter where my data file is, the field I want to check, what the date field for the date field for the data file. I set the fiscal month because I want to be sure that it's picking the right months, and then I can put my scope amounts in. And these are just, I made them up at the time, so it's just whatever I might want to use. And then this will produce a report that has all of the payments that meet those criteria, and I usually go on and then I use that as the basis for my work paper for doing the search for unrecorded liabilities, and document it and put it back into my audit file. Now we're ready for a polling question.
Okay, I'm going to launch the first poll. As you can see, it says please select A if you're a jokester. You can select B, either one, but please remember you have to respond to 3 of the 4 polling questions to receive CPE credit. And I will leave this up for about 30 more seconds. Carl, we did get a couple questions that I think we can get through pretty quickly if you don't mind right now.
Sure.
The first one is, how do you add the standard script ribbon?
I'd have to look in the help because I haven't done it in a while. Off the top of my head, you have to go, I'm not sure, I couldn't really explain it, but you can go in and let me see if I can open IDEA quick. You're going to set up another tab on your ribbon, and then you're going to set up folders within that tab, and then you're going to attach your scripts to it. And the people that can really help with that are going to be the IDEA Help Desk. If you go into File, and then it says Customize Ribbon, and that's where you would set. It's got where you set up a new tab, and then where you can add add your scripts to it.
Okay. Another quick one. The dashboard you show earlier for payments and later for receipts, are they from IDEA or another application? If separate from IDEA, is it getting the data automatically?
Everything we're going to look at today is from IDEA.
Perfect. Okay, I closed the first poll, so we can continue.
Okay. Okay. And we're moving on. We're going to look a little bit at payroll. Some of the different things that we can do in the payroll area. Sometimes we'll want to get depending on how the data comes in and looks, sometimes we'll want to get it directly from the payroll records, the payroll files, or sometimes it may be easier, depending on the test we want to do, to go like to QuickBooks and just get all of the payments in the salary accounts. That way we know we're getting the gross salaries rather than the net, which you might get if you took the salaries from their payroll listing. And some basic tests that I do, and I've got a picture of this next one coming up, is look at summary of employees with their different statistics. So the number of records shows how many payments that employee was given, and so you would know, geez, this is odd. Why does this one have 27 or 28 when they normally should have 26? If they're salaried employees, they should have a very, very low or zero standard deviation. So when the standard deviation is higher, it means something else. There's some other kinds of payments going on. A lot of times you can find things like if they're doing health insurance buyouts, quickly looking at this. If there's bonuses, I found some situations where I was seeing bonuses, then was able to go to the board minutes and see where those bonuses approved or not approved. Termination payments will show up in here, a whole variety of different things. And the next one is, a lot of times schools or some other types of entities will have very detailed types of work performed in their payroll records, and we can use IDEA to analyze that and see what types of payments are actually being made. Here's a payroll dashboard, and it's got very similar information to the payments dashboard, except if we look at the left two, it shows some of the different payment types and what their percentage or makeup is, as opposed to the just regular payments. So you can see your contract payments, which this is a school, you would expect to see most of it being in contract. Then there's hourly and extended day and various other types. I use that as part of our risk assessment process, and I've got another slide on that a little bit later. But it also shows the types of positions that they're paying and what makes up the most of it. And as we would expect, most of it's going to be teachers of elementary and secondary. If we look over on the right side, we'll see those big spikes in the month 12. Those are usually caused, and we would find it unusual if they weren't there, by when teachers get paid for the big payment at the end of the school year to last them through the summer. Here's an example of what I was talking about a little bit earlier, where I was using the earnings summary to kind of figure out what my higher risk areas were and what I wanted to do in a payroll sample. As we see, most of it's in contract, and if we were to do a pure random sample of contracts, of the payroll, the odds are pretty good that that's mostly what we would get. So what I've done here is I've done the summary by earnings type, and then I've appended another column, which are things that I want to pick to test. So I'm going to use those things to, based on my own judgment and knowledge of the district and other things, to decide which things I want to include in the sample. And I look for things like extra pay, overtime pay, things that need documentation and support, so that I can make sure that those things are being handled properly. Sometimes you'll come across things which are not in the contract, so we have to go, I want to definitely make sure I pick those and looked into them accordingly. I use this fairly extensively. After I've picked it, I want to do a stratified sample to make sure that I can set my sample sizes to include that. And the easiest way for me to do that is I append another field which I give the strata, because it's a lot easier to do it to go by number than it would be to do it by the actually spelling of things. So that's what that strata is. It's going to enable me to use that as part of my sampling method. Everything that's not in those strata is going to be outside, and it won't be part of my selection. This is what the stratified sampling selector looks like. And you just go in here and you type in however many of the items you want picked for sampling, the sample size. Click OK. It'll do an extraction, pull them all out for you, and you can go along and do your work paper from there. The other handy thing about it is you do that, and you can send it off to the client to have them do the pulling for you. And it's a lot faster, and I think more effective than going the old way of doing every other one, every 10th one, or running a random table. All I have to do is import it. I do my basic analysis, which is largely consisting of putting together those dashboards and then taking a look and deciding what things I want to pull. And I've got standard scripts which I use to do a lot of this as well. Another polling question.
Okay, here comes the second polling question. Please select one. If you're having trouble viewing the polling questions, just make sure you type in the comment box and let me know. But I'll give you guys about 20 more seconds to answer. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and close it. And back over to you, Carl.
Okay. You would use that same type of technique if you were going to do a payment sample or any other sample in IDEA, if you wanted to do the random stratified sample. And I find it to be, a very effective way of targeting where you think your high-risk area is. One of the nice things about the dashboards and using the data analysis in IDEA is you can really help define what your population is. You can say, well, some things, if you're doing a payment sample, there are going to be a whole lot of, like in a school, you might have a ton of Medicare payments to retirees. They're not really going to, they may not be what you really want to hit on when you're doing that. So you can define your population by analyzing it and then figuring out what really is going to matter to your test. And you can do that fairly quickly and easily. Sales or revenues, you can do the same types of sampling type procedures and tests. You can do the same type of analysis to come and look and see what kind of sales or revenue transactions there are, and then design your test around that. I like to use charts, and the charts I can look at several years and kind of get an idea of the relationship of what's happening. So I can look at that and I can see, well, the 2016 there was a big bump in month 9, and I wonder what happened there that drew month 9 out. So I can look at that and say, okay, yep, that's the story behind that, and find out. Share a lot. Sometimes I'll share some of these charts at audit committee meetings with the board members and audit committee members. And I had one situation where I was showing one of these charts, and it had instead of a jump up, it had a way jump down. And they wanted to know what it was, and the board president says that's when we had the wrong person doing that job. So it can really, you can use them as a really good tool for generating discussion among the when you're talking with audit committees and board members. The other thing that you can do well with IDEA, particularly for revenues and in your analytical reviews, is to do a correlation analysis, where you would look at revenues as compared to units of service, cost of sales, direct labor, travel, and you can see, is there a high correlation, a low correlation, negative correlation, and you can develop your expectations to how those things should work together. So quite frequently, revenue should be very closely correlated to units of service. So we can look at that and say, yep, okay, we expected it to be very high. It is very high. That's good. It's not as high as we expected. What's going on and making the difference up? A lot of times I'll have a discussion with the management and be talking with them about how things were going for the year, and they'll say their units of service were way up, and I'll try to take that data and compare it to what actually happened and look at the correlations and say, is what they're saying to me making sense? Or the two jiving out together. So it's kind of another way to look at things and compare back and forth. For years, testing journal entries would drive me nuts, trying to figure out which ones to test and how to effectively go about doing it. A lot of times you'll go in and you'll go to a school or a government and you'll ask for the journal entry book, and it's about 10 inches thick. And after about 3 pages, I think I'd be put to sleep. But if I get all of the journal entry file, I can do pretty decent analysis of it using IDEA in a fairly quick way to go about it. It's another good example of where you might want to better define your population too, because a lot of the entries, particularly in a government, are standard. They're generated right by the machine itself, and if you can't generate a report that eliminates that, you can use IDEA to get rid of those things that don't really need to be looked at. Probably one of the more exciting things that we've been working on in testing journal entries is word analysis. And I got one of those here. I use the word list maker, which comes in and it goes through the file, and it goes, you set it to pick up the description, and it goes through and does all of the words that are used in the description section of the file. And it also gives you the count of the words. So what I like to do is I get that, and there's usually a fair number of them, but I can kind of scan through it and say, what kind of words am I not expecting to see in the journal entries, or what might I want to look at a little bit better. Things like IRS, adjustment, error, attorney, words like that usually say, I want to take a look at that a little bit. Or if I happen to see somebody's name, particularly if it's a board member or a top management person, and I might want to pick that one too. So I go in and I get my word count, and then I say, which one of these do I want to test by appending a little field to it. It's called a Boolean field, basically a yes or a no. And I just check it, and that's the one I want to pick. So then I run it through the looping search, which goes back through my original file and compares the words that I picked back to the original file and extracts all of the journal entries that have that, those words in them. So then I can go down and look and say, okay, these are the ones. Some of them are okay, who cares, but I went through and I looked at it and I was able to say, yeah, those really aren't that important. It just gives me another way to get a good look at things. And I can put my comments right in the file. Here's a wrong one. You can also do, I haven't prepared one for you, but you can do a dashboard of your journal entries and come up with various things to do. You can do the stratifications or look for large or unusual amounts, so you can actually define what's large in there and say, okay, these are the one over this amount. And the nice thing about the stratifications when you're doing that is a lot of times we're tempted to just say, oh, everything over 100,000 or whatever the number may be. But if we looked at that stratification in the dashboard, we can say, okay, yeah, really most of these, I want to set my large amount a little bit higher or lower. It gives you some basis for why you made that decision. Another area that we use a lot in the audits now is looking at the user activities. As everything gets more and more electronically done, the work is done. There isn't as much real written signatures or an evidence that's in the files anymore. I think we need to look more and more at what the users are doing and the protections that are set up within the systems. So if I can get a good user activity report, we can do quite a bit with that as far as internal control testing, looking for double users. There's, you name it, there's all kinds of things that we can do with that. So this is a dashboard that I worked on to do the for the user activities, and there's 65,000 records. You can see the earliest and latest times. Sometimes that's usual, and sometimes it's not. A lot of times I'll see superintendents of school, I don't know what, sitting around at night or early in the morning approving purchase orders. So that's most likely what some of that is. And the dates show the completeness of the file. On the lower left, that report shows the users that are using the file and how often they're using it, or not how much as a percentage they're using it. And then the different types of the modules that are being active and which are the most active. So accounts payable and payments are the most, purchasing close second. And then we can also see the counts and how active they are, when the high points are, when the slow points are. One of the really standard tests that we did for years and years and years was to pull a sample of payments and look at approvals. One of the most important approvals, particularly in schools, is that the purchases are approved by the purchasing agent. We always consider that to be a key control. Well, if you take your sample, in a lot of these places, you get a purchase order, it's pre-printed, the signature came right from the machine. I don't know who signed it or how it got through. So we developed a test to go through the user activity reports and see who was actually signing the, issuing the approval for the purchase order, so that we could say, yep, it was the purchasing agent. And sometimes you'll come up with two people doing that. Not too often, but here we can see at the top, the only one who actually issued the purchase orders was the purchasing agent. The other one, all the other approval levels are various intermediary approvals, either by department heads, building people, or maybe even when they originally enter the purchase order or the requisition. Other tests we can do on that are look at the after hours, unusual access, and see what staff are accessing various modules within the system. And that would be, we do that to kind of make sure that if there may appear to be good internal controls physically, are the controls still working externally or within the system itself? So if people are able to get to places and actually are getting places where they probably shouldn't be, I can ask, the client, we can talk about, well, why does so-and-so who's in accounts payable have access, or what are they doing in payroll? Sometimes there's a good reason they have to do the check for sending into the government for the payroll taxes, or vice versa. So sometimes there's a reason, and sometimes it's, oh, we never thought of that. Interesting thing happened a few years ago. We were looking at who could actually get into the system part of the activity reports and see who could make changes in the in people's permissions to do things. And I was looking at the report and seeing somebody making changes. I said, didn't they retire last year? Well, it happened that they had just given somebody who probably shouldn't have the access to be able to do that for ease of own ease. They just use that other retired person's account to get in there and do it. So that's another thing you can probably find with looking at those activity reports. Looks like we're due for another polling question.
Okay, I'm going to launch the third question. If you're having trouble viewing the questions, just send in via the chat or question box a response that just says, I can't view the third question, this is my response, and we'll count that. They are time-stamped, so you can't answer for the fourth one right now, but just use the chat or the question box and we'll be able to count that. Give you guys a couple more seconds, and I'll try to fit in a quick question right now if I can.
Okay.
Let's see. Can you do word analysis on any field, like a description field for AP invoices?
Yeah. You can do that for pretty much any data file field.
Perfect. I'll give you guys about 10 more seconds. Just remember to chat or type in a question if you can't see the polls, and we will count that.
Yeah, the two, the looping search and the word find apps are available directly from automation. You don't have to do any of that yourself. You just download it. I think there's a fee for it, but I found it to be a very helpful tool.
Okay, I've closed the poll. Back over to you, Carl.
Okay. Another handy thing to use is the Benford's analysis. And Benford is it's just a mathematical law that says that the digit 1 will appear a lot more than the subsequent digits. and 9 occurring the least often, and there's like a curve that it follows. And you can use that because it says that every natural database should fall within those parameters. So if you're having anomalies, you can check and just by clicking into it and saying, okay, this is what the issue is. One of the basic uses is for internal control avoidances. Like if you had a internal control process set at $5,000 and the Benford shows that there's an unusual large spike at $4,900, somebody's probably making purchases at just under the dollar limit for the internal control process to kick in. Might be a second approval or a second signature. Sometimes there'll be some of those spikes will be perfectly normal, like in schools, those Medicare payments or payments to sports refs, they're usually the same dollar amount, so they would cause an anomaly. And that goes back to what I was talking about earlier, where if you're expecting, things don't fit the set, you could take those out because they're normal for this. Or you can leave them in and just explain it. I do it for nonprofits as well, and I expect there should be spikes at those digit intervals because at 1, 5, 10, 15, 20, those things, people normally, those are normal donations amount, $10, $15, $50, $500, that kind of thing. So if I'm seeing that kind of pattern, that's pretty normal, but if I see spikes in other ranges, then I might want to click into them and say, okay, what's going on with these, and just take a look at it. And Benford works pretty much if you have more than 2,000 records and there's no set pattern to the file, like a sales thing that's based on a multiplier or something like that. And there's a picture of what the Benford analysis might look like. And you can go in and it does the spike, and then you click on the spike and you can just write your comments right there. This particular the pictures aren't, I did them using a screenshot program, and so I do the screenshot of idea and then I can edit it to make it fit for my work papers. There's really, like I said before, no limit to what you can use IDEA to do, and you can design your own tests to do things. And like we were talking about before, with this purchasing agent being one of the key controls over the payments, particularly in a school or other government. So what we decided to do was, in the old days, you would take a sample and you would come up, if your sample was, say, 60 and everything came out clean, all of them had an approved PO, you would draw the conclusion that, okay, yep, they must be using POs where they're supposed to. With IDEA, you can go in and you can test the entire population for the POs. I designed a test that would go in and look at the payments, make sure that if they were supposed to, they did have POs. And that makes, you have to really understand the client systems and the types of payments they have to do that, because some payments don't need a PO. They wouldn't be subject to the PO, like the sports reps, for instance, may not be. The Medicare payments, things like that. So you want to exclude those things from the test so you're not getting a false negative. So basically then I would go in and I wrote a script, and it goes through all of them and finds out and identifies which ones don't have a PO. And also, one of the other key things with using the POs we thought was that there should be a timeliness between when the PO is issued and when the check's written. If they're too close together, maybe they're just doing the PO in order to run through the payment, and it really didn't go through the proper process. Somebody made the order, did what they weren't supposed to do, and now they, oh, we need the paper to cover it, to make it right. So I did a little test to look at that, and here's the picture of that. The one on the left are the payments out of all of the funds, and then down at the very bottom I identified 9 payments out of all the 3,145 in the A fund that didn't have POs. So my conclusion there, after I clicked into them and saw what they were, was yeah, they're really pretty well following what they're supposed to be doing with the POs. And I might talk to them and find out, oh, why didn't these have a PO? And usually there's a pretty good reason. The test on the right is the comparison of the check dates back to the PO dates. So I'm looking at the spread of dates, 0 to 5 days. They were really close. There's only 4 of them. I can click into that and see what they were. 5 to 15, a little better, but as we can see, the majority of them are at least 30 days out. So that's a pretty good indicator. One of my next steps is to try to work on a way to dig into the user activity reports to see if I can identify a method for determining when the requisitions were done, because that would even be a better indicator of timeliness. And this particular thing with the checks versus POs is a pretty standard looking stratification table that that shows up for just about any kind of stratification that you would do. Testing entire populations, I think, is really handy. We work with a number of schools, and one of the things we have to do is look at the free and reduced lunch, and we have to take a sample from that, so I can use IDEA to stratify that sample, see what components are in there. And in New York, at least, there is a direct certification process where I think it's the state has a online list of who's eligible by zip code for free and reduced lunch, or be the free, and the schools go in and they import that into their free and reduced program, and they're already automatically free. So by looking at the data file, I can say which ones of these are on that direct certification list, and then I can obtain the list and compare the two using IDEA and say, okay, I was able to identify all or most of the students that were claimed to be direct certified as actually being direct certified from the state. What that does is, that's usually the majority of that of the free and reduced population. So now when I do my sampling, I'm doing it on a much smaller population, just the free and reduced people that were done by an application, and I can get a much better test. Also, if I find a couple errors on the application test, when I extrapolate out, I've got a much smaller impact because I've already made sure that all those direct certs, they don't have to be involved in that. And by using IDEA, a lot of times an application will have more than one student on it, so I can determine how many, even if I pick 30 applications, I may have tested 80 students, so I can document that and show what I did. And there's tons of probably more different types of tests that you can do just by having knowledge of the client and using imagination to say, how can I solve this problem quickly and effectively. In order to, like I said before, to do all that and put this slideshow together, I use Faststone Capture for my screen app, and I cut and pasted it pasted this right into PowerPoint. But most of the times what I do is I put it right into Word or on my audit programs. I've got a standard data analysis and discussion, internal control discussion work paper where I describe our test of controls and how I used IDEA to test it, sampling, how I determine my sample sizes. I take a screenshot of the sampling calculator from IDEA to use, and any other discussion. There's a lot of these slides are what I would use in there, but I would have put in a lot more detail about what I looked at and describing the different transactions that I looked at on them. Okay. So that's for me probably the best way I've come up with so far to really use to document a lot of the tests that I'm using in IDEA and put it into a readable format. Here's a picture of the sampling screenshot. So you can set your tolerable deviation rates, define your population size, and all the rest of that, and it comes up with how many things you need to pick for a sample. Another polling question.
Okay, this is our last polling question. Again, if you're having trouble answering, just send us a message in the question box and let us know this is your answer for the fourth polling question. And while we have some time, I'm just going to ask a quick question, Carl. Going back a little bit, how do we get the SFUL script?
Where was that? SF.
I think it was before the second polling question, so it was quite a ways back. So we can jump to another one if you want to skip that one for now.
Okay.
What types of files do you use to feed into IDEA?
In New York, some of the main software packages that are used by the schools are WinCap and Finance Manager for a variation of it. And New York has the comptroller just set standard export packages that they want for when they do their audits. So I asked for them. QuickBooks is really great because you can do all your data extraction and do your data collection yourself from your client. There's no way to, you can really define those fields. And I've got an earlier video that I did a year and a half or so ago on QuickBooks that talks about getting data in QuickBooks quite a bit. But depending on the program, a lot of times they can export an account, or there's ways that they can export transactions to Excel. I like comma-separated value ones if I'm going to be doing something over and over, because I can write what's called an RDF file, which is a kind of an import file, so it standardizes it. Or you can, if you can get somebody to get them to print it as a PDF file, you can import right off the PDF. Sometimes that can be a little trickier, but it's a good way to go too. But normally you either want Excel, CSV, or a PDF, and you can get that from almost anything.
Perfect. Just a reminder, if you couldn't view the fourth poll, just send me a message and let me know, and we will count that. And I'll turn it back over to Carl now.
What was the other question?
The SFUL script.
SFUL. Do you know what slide that was on?
I believe it was before the second polling question.
Yeah, that one's not ringing a bell. SFUL.
If that was your question, if you can provide some clarification, we'll try to get back around to it.
Okay, is there another question?
Do you have some more slides to get through?
No, I think we're pretty well there. If anybody has any of their own ideas, I'd really be interested in hearing them, because we learn, come up with other ideas is the best way we can do this.
I have a couple more questions ready for you. Is there a correlation analysis button or a specific spot for that kind of testing?
Yes, there is. And let me get back to here. It's on the Analysis tab, and it's in this, I think it's in the Statistics. In the Statistics file. If you can see that, that's where that correlation would be.
Perfect. And another one for you, is population data pulled via direct access, or is a data dump required prior to querying the data?
You have to get the data into IDEA before you can do the analysis. At least as far as I know, that that's the only way I know how to do it.
And it sounds like SFUL might stand for Search for Unrecorded Liabilities.
Oh, that's one that I developed myself, and I probably would be hesitant to share it just because if it makes a mistake, I wouldn't want to mess anybody up.
Perfect.
Yeah, it's not a one available for purchase.
Another quick one, how do you handle PDF files when the data zigzags a lot?
One way I do with that is sometimes I'll put it into another program, and I can pop that up. I'll put it into like this Able to Extract program, which goes through and it converts it into an Excel file. And sometimes it still needs some more cleaning. Or sometimes there's other ways to use floating traps where you can do it. Sometimes I'll ask them if they can export it in a different, if I can get it in a different format. Sometimes the client can put it in an Excel file that can be cleaned up a lot easier. That can be an issue. And sometimes if it's still messed up and it's really just the program's reading it wrong, I'll print the file again in another PDF program, and a lot of times in a very high resolution, and that'll straighten out the problem.
And one more, it's kind of going back to the beginning. What kind of questions can you answer with pulling teacher salaries?
I'm not sure I understand the question fully. If I can look at the different payment types, and like if there's a retirement payment, I can see that, yep, I can check and make sure that that actually person was scheduled for retirement. I can look at vacation pay. If there's vacation paid, I can make sure that's within the contract amounts, you know, the contract definitions. I usually don't pick a lot of teacher contract payments because we test those in other ways, particularly when they're doing the roll forward and doing the new year, and they a lot of times sign off on what they're going to be, so I can test the total amounts back to the contract.
Okay, since we're right about at 3 p.m., we're going to go ahead and end here. If you have any burning questions, you can email marketing@automation.com, and we'll try to get those answered for you. Just a reminder that the recording and the slides will be emailed to you in the next day or so, and your CPE certificates should arrive next week via email. Thank you so much, Carl, and thank you everyone for joining us.
Thank you, and if anybody has any questions I can answer for you, feel free to shoot me an email as well, or any ideas on other testing to do.
Perfect. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Bye.
Have a good day, everyone.